Good afternoon. My name is Floudopoulos. I am a journalist at Capital.gr, and I will be the moderator for the next panel under the title The Transformation of the Industry and its Vision 2050. It is widely acknowledged that the oil industry is one of the biggest emitters in the energy sector, which means that the challenges in order to achieve the goals of carbon neutrality are even greater. In order to discuss about these challenges, as well as the preparations and the strategies of the industry, in order to transform and meet the green goals, so we have with us a panel of prominent speakers that I'm sure will give us a clear picture regarding the strategy of the industry towards the 2050 targets. First, let me introduce our panelists, starting from our keynote speaker, Mr. John Cooper, General Director of FuelsEurope. From the industry, we have also with us Mr. George Alexopoulos, member of the Board of Directors and General Manager of the Helpec Group, responsible for the group's strategic planning and new activities. From the Motor Oil Hellas Group, we have Mr. Victor Papaconstantinou, General Manager of Strategic Planning and Development. We also have the pleasure to host Dr. Nikolaos Liapis, Chief Operations Officer of ELINOIL, Mr. Nikos Kontaroudis, First Vice Chair of the Hellenic Capital Markets Commission, and last but not least, we have with us Mr. Peter Mather, Chairman of BP Europe. So, without any further ado, Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours. We look forward to your presentation regarding the ambitious transition to climate neutrality of the refining industry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Floudopoulos, and also my thanks to Mr. Stamboulis and Mrs. Guta for the invitation to contribute here today. I've been following already an excellent conference and happy to share some more information here. So let me share today our work we have done on our Clean Fuels for All strategy together with our member companies. And this is all about the transformation of the European refining and fuels industry towards climate neutrality. First of all, very briefly, the membership of FuelsEurope consists of all 40 companies in Europe refining petroleum, and this includes several from the panel here today, from Hellenic Petroleum, from Motor Oil Hellas, and of course also BP. And the work that we've done here has been done in collaboration with our members. About Clean Fuels for All, this was a strategy that we started some 5 years ago. Actually, even before the Paris Agreement was signed, we started looking at all the pathways for low carbon products, low carbon pathways we called it, for technologies in manufacturing and also in the feedstocks that can be used to make low carbon liquid fuels. And it's a pathway that we've described that gets us to climate neutrality in 2050. So what do we mean by low carbon liquid fuels? Sustainable liquid fuels from a non-petroleum origin, produced from every available feedstock that can contribute to the production of these fuels. Biomass, renewables of all kinds, waste and captured CO2. And we see some photographs there just to give you an idea. But the basic objective is this, and this is something we believe is achievable. By 2050, at the latest, in Europe, every litre of liquid fuel that is still required for transport can be net climate neutral, enabling the decarbonisation of aviation, maritime, and the remaining needs in road transport. This information is all available on our website. The link is at the end of this presentation, and so you can follow up as you wish. In terms of the numbers, there's a huge amount of work behind this. This one slide here I share is the summary of hundreds of pages of background work. This is a plan that is done from the ground up, taking into consideration feedstock, the advice of the European Commission, JRC, on the availability of these feedstocks for biofuels. And this picture gives an overview on the left-hand side of the first 10 years of delivering this strategy up to 2030. And you see there the technologies being used. First generation biofuels, we know they have a limit. We are not proposing this as the main strategy. We propose we simply keep the first generation at the levels they are today. The scope for increase starts with increasing the use of hydrogenation on oils mostly of waste and residue origin through hydrotreatment, probably in biorefinery conversions, and we see some scope for improving there, and it's certainly at the lower end of the cost scale. The next progress is in using lower quality biomass. It's already come up in discussion with Professor Kapros' presentation. Lower quality through cellulosic routes and other conversion routes to start producing significant volumes of advanced biofuels. And then the next stage, which really is preparation for a larger scale later, is starting to produce fuels, e-fuels, from clean hydrogen routes with captured carbon. And finally, introduction in the manufacturing processes of carbon capture and storage, and also clean hydrogen. On the right-hand side, this then shows what the investment profile looks like going out to 2050. We've costed this as around 650 billion euros in capital investments, and this gets us to around 150 million tons of oil equivalent by 2050. As I say, a huge amount of work behind this. This is only a summary. To give you an idea of what's going on here, this is not about completely replacing petroleum and preventing the need for any other routes. This strategy is intended to be hand in hand with significant electrification, in particular of light transport, and also the stringent efficiency measures that are already proposed by the Commission. For reference, we pick a scenario that the European Commission has already detailed in its work, Clean Planet for All. Already in 2030 policies, even before they are tightened, the demand for liquids in road transport is set to fall dramatically. And this graph with the grey here shows it falling from 270 million tonnes to around 90 by the years 2050. Our work set out to see whether we could meet that demand with climate neutral fuels. And I'll give you a preview. Yes, of course, actually we can meet that. And in fact, as per the previous graph, the potential is to supply around 150 million tonnes, which would exceed road transport needs and allow us to substantially provide for aviation and maritime. In fact, to provide as per the Green Deal requirements. What does that do for the refinery? And I'm referencing here a question that was for Dr. Drolas just a few minutes ago, which refineries will survive and what is the role there? Well, actually, we anticipate that too. The graph before shows that the demand for liquids in any case in Europe will drop. But actually, one of the things that we observe here is that as we convert refineries, typically they have more upgrading but lower capacity. They have a lower throughput overall. We have our first biorefineries in Europe already, and this is exactly how the technology and the development is occurring. But we actually see the refinery develop into a more complicated but very, very constructive energy hub, often within an industrial cluster. It means an evolution of the feedstocks, moving out of crude oil gradually into more bio-related feedstocks, could be biocrudes or other types of waste CO2, and other forms even of the lowest grades of waste plastic. A refinery is a massive factory for conversion of hydrocarbons into other hydrocarbons. That's exactly what we're expert at. And what we believe is that this can be an important part of the future energy system, integrating with other systems, including providing residual heat, exchanging wastes and residues with other industries in a cluster. But the interesting thing around all of this for us is that the output in chemical nature can be very similar to what it is today, meaning the infrastructure downstream is largely the same. And where we're producing low carbon or climate neutral fuels, we have the infrastructure to the side of every truck, every plane, every ship already, which is a very big efficiency in investments for Europe. You may think that this is a pipe dream or a hypothetical scenario. Actually, we've already started. Here are 24 sites in Europe where the projects have been announced, and in many cases, the first construction has started. In a few cases, these are pilot plants up and running. To make this work, we'll actually need hundreds of plants, several hundred plants, and so we are also talking about what we need in policy to make these investments and scale up further. So let's just highlight what's happened so far. The European Commission has actually announced the formation of a renewable and low-carbon fuels value chain alliance. This is very welcome, inspired by such things as the original alliance that created Airbus, also now more recently the Battery Alliance, the Hydrogen Alliance. This new development is very welcome. In addition, Refuel EU Aviation and Fuel EU Maritime are initiatives to boost for those sectors as well. We fully agree and support with those. But we also believe road transport can play an essential part of this strategy, enabling faster decarbonisation of road transport, but also strong support for these investments, more market pull, less sensitivity to the higher costs, and an additional route for decarbonisation for example, some long-distance trucks, for the smallest of vehicles, maybe for the older parts of vehicle fleets as well. One of the ideas we are floating now is the idea that long-term contracts for renewable liquids with customer groups could be used as an enabling mechanism, and where we supply an internal combustion engine vehicle, truck or bus or car, with 100% renewable fuels, we think this system should get some recognition and some support from regulators. To fully develop this overall system and the potential here, we do believe that a more substantial cross-sectoral strategy for this liquid renewable sector should be developed by the Commission and embraced by member states. Towards the end here, I'd like to give you an idea, why do we think this is affordable? We are being very clear that making liquid fuels this way will cost more than using petroleum. Petroleum has been an incredible gift of nature, but we now know it is not part of the circular economy. The path of carbon is linear, and we need to replace that with a carbon path which is circular. So on the left-hand side, here's the carbon pricing cost expressed in euros per ton of CO2 saved for a number of critical industrial and feedstock-related technologies. CCS at around 100 euros per ton, could be as high as 300 for a mixed gas stream. Green hydrogen, 300 to 400 at the moment. And then HVO technologies at around 100 euros, going through to e-fuels, 300 to 400 euros a ton. These are expensive. But the good news is, actually, we've got policy tools in Europe that can already make these things work. On the left of this, on the right-hand side, you'll see the dotted line again on policy tools. And you'll see we start there with ETS. ETS as a system is not enough to decarbonize transport. And so its use in transport does need some care. It needs to be supported by other measures. And here on the yellow bars, we show things that are already in place. Fuel tax is like a carbon tax of 200 euros a ton. It's actually not described like that. We are proposing that it is turned into a carbon tax. That will then help many of these technologies on the left-hand side. But then vehicle regulation have high carbon prices embedded as well. So we think renewable fuels at 100% could be recognized in the liquid, in the vehicle regulation, and a route to reduce the vehicle fleet carbon intensity. Finally, as an example on the right-hand side, we show that we've come to terms with using some heavier price signals because the support package typically given to an electric car comes to over 1,000 euros a ton. And we also use this to illustrate that despite what we may have heard before, this route that we're describing is, we think, certainly competitive with electrification and should be considered for some parts of road transport, as well as the essential role for these technologies in aviation and maritime. So for some conclusions, Europe's climate ambition expects only a very small role for petroleum transport fuels in 2050. We've come to terms with that. However, it will be very difficult to replace all liquid fuels. Liquids remain simply the best form of energy storage and delivery. And using a range of technologies, biomass, waste, and residue feedstocks, we can make significant quantities of low-carbon liquid fuels, enough to be an enduring part of the future. So all liquid fuels that remain in Europe in 2050 can be climate neutral. We expect production costs to be higher, But this is counterbalanced by the sheer utility of the liquid, the ability to use existing storage and distribution, very high practicality. And the road use can help us grow the overall scale of this industry for the longer term. There is no regret here. If we don't need this for road transport in the long term, we surely will need it at scale for aviation and maritime as well. In addition, this strategy, it has important links with the whole industrial strategy, bringing forward a faster route to develop CCS and hydrogen and to integrate with other industries, just as Cohen-Koppenholz's presentation proposed just a few minutes ago. So in the context of Europe's strong climate and taxation policies, this strategy, even though it is ambitious, we believe quite clearly, because of the work we have done, this is very achievable from a technical, commercial, and political aspect. Thank you. Here is the website for you to follow up if you wish. The information that we're sharing here is all available. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for your insightful presentation. And let me emphasize your estimate that it will be difficult to replace all liquid fuels with electricity and hydrogen fuels, and that by 2050, all remaining liquid fuels can be carbon neutral. Next is Mr. Alexopoulos. So what does Hellenic Petroleum do in order to transform and meet the ambitious green targets? George, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Harry, and a big thanks to the organizers for inviting me. Also, thanks to John for the excellent presentation, which actually serves as a very good introduction for my presentation. Hellenic Petroleum is an energy group in transition. But since we're going to talk about transition, just a brief comment on energy transition. The key drivers for energy transition are two. The one is very obvious, and I think we all know that it's the mitigant to climate change, and that is extremely important. But there's a second driver, which is not independent of the first, but I believe is important in its own right. And that is the fact that new technologies are becoming increasingly more competitive and thus can replace conventional technologies. So I think it's important to keep that in mind in our discussion. Hellenic Petroleum is a leading energy group in Southeastern Europe. Our core business is downstream oil. We are building a presence in renewables and gas and power, and we see this as a new pillar of the new Hellenic Petroleum, if you like. We have an integrated system of 3 refineries with extensive synergies between them. We also have a vertically integrated chemicals production, which is focused on the polypropylene chain. We have a privileged location which allows us to use crudes from different parts of the world and also place our products more efficiently in the market. We have important logistics assets. We have integrated marketing positions in the region. And last but not least, we have an expanding gas and power business. We have a renewable business which currently stands at 1,300 megawatts. That's a pipeline, not our installed capacity. And also an E&P business focused on exploration in Greece. I think it's quite clear that energy transition has accelerating, and it is affecting the totality of our business and our operating model. We've noted a few trends that affect demand and supply, and also, very importantly, in our business, regulation and financial markets. So, starting with energy demand, we see significant growth, but it's mostly going to be in the developing world. We see increased use of plastics, at the same time, increased importance of recycling. Energy efficiency is going to be a key theme across the board, process efficiency, vehicle efficiency, and so on. There will be a gradual switch to electrification. Electric vehicles are going to become an increasingly bigger part of the global car fleet. There is growth in low carbon fuels. We see a constantly declining cost in renewable technologies, in power generation renewable technologies. There is a rapid decline in battery storage costs, and this, when it is complete, it will complete the decarbonization of power. And in terms of regulation, financial markets, there are important regulations for the reduction of emissions. And clearly, there is now a global agenda on greenhouse gas emission reduction. We note that EU is always on the forefront, but increasingly the other big emitters have joined this initiative. And last but not least, the ESG theme is becoming more and more important for investors everywhere. In this context, we see energy transformation as an opportunity. And we have a vision to turn it into an opportunity by excelling in our core business and at the same time develop a diversified energy portfolio. So we see it as a movement in a two-axis frame of reference. One is growth of our business, and at the same time transitioning to the new energy future. We're going to do that through three pillars. The first one being an improvement, a performance improvement of our core business, competitiveness, digitization, energy efficiency. Maximize the value of our core business by leveraging our existing investment with selective investments in our industrial base, and at the same time building on those assets for further trading opportunities. And last but not least, we are diversifying and developing new businesses. We have a significant position in renewables. We're expanding in power and gas. We're creating options in E&P, and we're looking for opportunities linked to energy transition. And we're going to talk about that further down the presentation. So we have a number of energy transition initiatives which cut across our three strategic pillars. Some are more mature, like energy efficiency improvement across the board, not just in our industrial processes. We're building a renewables portfolio. We are looking into the recycle and reuse of plastic as a feedstock. We're increasingly using bio-based feedstocks. We're developing e-mobility infrastructure and the service offering associated with that. We're looking into the retail business of the future, and these are the shorter term initiatives. And longer term, we're looking at green and blue hydrogen. We're looking at integrating renewable power into our operations. We're looking to produce renewable fuels for hard-to-abate sectors such as aviation, marine, and we would be considering CCS and CCU opportunities. Most of the above initiatives are connected to the production and use of low-carbon liquid fuels. And you can tell from the diversity of the initiatives that we need, as an industry and as a global society, to pull different levels to achieve our goals. It's not going to be a single solution or a single technology. We need to leverage different technologies which may be more suitable for one application or another in order to achieve our goal. Let's look at some more specific initiatives that we are already running. Starting from decarbonizing our processes, energy efficiency is an ongoing investment in refining. I think all of you know that. We are planning to reduce our energy consumption by 10% by 2030. The energy consumption today of our refineries is 16 terawatt hours. The power consumption of Greece is about 55 terawatt hours. So it's a huge amount of energy, and it's an already very, very efficient production. So the reduction is going to make an important contribution, not only in cost, but also in the environmental footprint. We are digitalizing our refineries. We have recently launched a digital transformation initiative targeting 50 million euro of annual performance improvements. We are already evaluating options for integrated green hydrogen production to substitute a part of our existing production. We realize, again, that the scale of today and the state of technology of today does not allow us to go directly to full green or blue hydrogen production. But we have to start somewhere, and this is with what we are designing. At the same time, we're decarbonizing our feedstock. In terms of biofuels production, we have converted our ether producing units, substituting methanol with bioethanol to meet the biofuels content spec in gasoline. So we are producing the gasoline we need, not through blending, but through our own production and through the use of biocomponents. We are developing renewable diesel applications through a co-processing of used cooking oil in our hydrodesulfurization process. And we are evaluating technologies for plastics reuse and recycle, which can either be introduced in our fuels pool or back into our chemicals production. Last but not least, we're leveraging R&D projects. We have a portfolio of projects related to low carbon technologies, special focus on second and third generation biofuels, green hydrogen production, waste to fuel technologies, storage, and biorefineries. Going to an important new business we are developing. We have set a strategic goal to develop a significant portfolio of renewable power production, which will also contribute to our own use of power and thus allow us to reduce our scope 2 emissions. We are targeting 300 megawatts by the end of the year and 600 megawatts by 2025. We will achieve this target through a diversified strategy, both in terms of origination and technologies. We're using a combination of organic development and acquisitions. We have a diversified renewables projects portfolio in excess of 1.3 gigawatts, mainly photovoltaic and wind, at various stages of development. And at the same time, we're looking at the potential acquisition of mature projects or projects in operation. We are currently building the PV project in Kozani. We believe this is a flagship energy project. It's the first major project contributing to the transition to the post-lignite area and the development of Western Macedonia. Western Macedonia is the power-producing region of Greece, and its economy is totally dependent on lignite production, and lignite is being phased out as part of the energy transition initiatives. It's an investment of 130 million euros. more than 35% of materials, equipment, and employment are sourced from Greece, and we're targeting to maximize the content from the Western Macedonia region. 350 jobs during construction and tens of direct and indirect jobs during operation. It is the largest renewables project in Greece at 204 megawatts and one of the largest PV plants in Europe. And it's clearly a low carbon footprint activity, generating 350 gigawatts of zero emission energy and resulting in CO2 emissions reduction benefit of about 320,000 tons per year. Closing, just to give you a strong message that we believe that ESG is not just a socially responsible move, but it's also good business, and it could be a unique opportunity for companies that embrace it. It could even become the next secular theme to outperform the market. It is, of course, too early to call it, but we can see a possible trend of ESG leaders much in the same way we saw in technology, media, and telecom companies starting in the 90s, or the BRICS starting in 2000, or USIT, the second run, which started in January 2016. Again, it's too early to call, but we believe it could become the next segment of the market to strongly outperform the market. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, George. Let me stress the ambitious goals that Hellenic Petroleum has set for its transformation, and among others, your strategy for developing renewable energy stations. So we saw what LP is doing. Our next speaker, Mr. Papaconstantinou, will present what the other big refining company in Greece is doing. Mr. Papaconstantinou, how is Moderator realizing the energy transition? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Harry. Let me extend my thanks to the organizers of this already very useful and interesting conference. And I want to build on John Cooper's discussion and share our views about the drivers of energy transition. But most importantly, I'd like to discuss the implications for Greece, especially as far as renewable fuels are concerned. Then I will present how this transition is shaping Motorola's strategy and what we are already implementing in order to lead this process. Before we start, let me give you a few data points on Moderator. Moderator has a very complex refinery, one of the biggest in the Eastern Mediterranean, close to Corinth. We have installations throughout Greece, and we are currently present in 4 other countries, including Croatia, Serbia, Cyprus, and North Macedonia. Using 2019 figures, Moderator is a 9 billion revenue company, around $500 million of EBITDA. In 2019, we spent around 260 million euros in overall investments, and we are employing about 2,200 employees. Now, the energy transition that most speakers previously referred to is already introducing profound changes, which are shaping the future of the energy sector. What we see is that these changes are driven by 6 key factors. One, of course, is the climate change in itself and the goals that trigger the transition to a low carbon and carbon neutral society. These ambitious targets come together with some very stringent regulations. As also George Alexopoulos discussed, there are structural long-term reduction in fossil fuel products that we see ahead, and also significant technological advances, which create competitive new energy sources. To lead or to actually cap all these, there are the consumer preferences. Consumers are increasingly conscious about the products they're using, and coming after that is the demands by the investors, which currently very often lead the choices that we make in terms of investments. These key drivers, which include the decarbonization targets and the general trends in mobility, shift towards renewable and carbon-free products. Now, this transition is driven mainly in our region by EU policy. RED II directive requires that by 2030, minimum 14% of the transport fuels will be of renewable origin. I stress here that this target is the minimum. Already Spain has declared that they were looking for a 28% content of renewable fuels, and Sweden 52%. Germany recently also announced a 28% target. As John said, we are now beyond the first generation of biofuels that were based on food and feed crops. As we see on the graph on the left-hand side, we are obliged now to advance to more advanced biofuels, waste oils and fats, which, however, are still capped, and then we will have to develop even more advanced biofuels from biomass, agricultural or forest waste, so on and so forth, in order to reach even the minimum 14% target. Now, this is an obligation, but also, as far as we see it, is an opportunity, especially for companies in the oil and gas sector that are willing to invest in new technologies. This opportunity may provide a niche market. Let's see, however, what is happening with the bigger picture. As we said, this is an opportunity, clearly, and as John Cooper said, the infrastructure is there. Not everything can be electrified, so liquid and renewable fuels will be needed. It is already compatible with existing infrastructure, the vehicle fleet and everything, so it makes a lot of sense from an investment point of view. The next one is a significant factor as we see it. Renewable fuels are expected to provide economic growth and support communities and activity, and provide a very sustainable area of activity. For a country like Greece, the use of indigenous raw materials will mean the gradual reduction of imported fossil fuels, so it has an even added benefit. All these are good, but there are some severe challenges that come with it. First of all, these opportunities come with much longer profitability horizons. We need to ensure that we accept that the returns on our investments will be longer and different than the ones we were accustomed until today. The size of the investment needed is large, and together with that, the technologies are often still immature, which increase significantly the risk on those investments. The feedstock is going to provide a new area of challenge. Every discussion about renewable fuels, depend on securing the raw materials that we need to produce them, which is a challenge when it gets to security of supply and logistics. And these all require a very specific policy and regulatory framework to support such investments. Now, what's happening in Greece? Greece has not yet implemented RED II directive. Even though there is an obligation to do so by mid-2021, there is no roadmap as far as we know leading to that. As a result, our efforts to develop renewable projects is still in a void. We do not know what will be required and by when. I want to stress once again the importance of renewable fuels specifically for Greece, as we see it. In our country, where opportunity for growth in a new economic activity are generally scarce, renewable fuels present unique prospects. First of all, renewable fuels are fundamentally in the core of circular economy. They are expected to support further the agriculture sector, as they will create a new activity that will be adding value to agricultural waste and forestry waste, etc., which previously were kept unused. Industries and refineries will boost their activity and, more importantly, will extend their long-term growth prospects. Economic development and job creation will come with that. By all means, environmental protection will be supported. And in addition, given that, as we see it, the domestic source of raw material will not be sufficient to support domestic demand, there is an opportunity to create a regional hub for collecting and processing biogenic feedstocks from a wider geographical region. Let's now discuss our strategy in motor oil, which has been shaped in order to provide a clear pathway in the context of this energy transition, in parallel with evolving and growing our core businesses in refining and fuel marketing. Our strategy primarily is split in 4 pillars. The first pillar has to do with the evolution of our refinery operations. In addition to investing in new products and more advanced products, we have already implemented a significant number of energy efficiency projects. Currently, our refinery is self-sustained in the production of electricity. This is why we're lucky enough to be largely unaffected last Sunday with the incident in the power grid in Athens region. And moreover, these power generation units use gases that would otherwise be emitted in the atmosphere, largely reducing the carbon footprint of our refinery. We are already implementing a large number of digital transformation projects, not only in the refinery, but also in the rest of our businesses. We are also designing projects related to decarbonization and carbon capture and storage. This is going to be a long process. I hope I will be able to share more with you pretty soon, as I'm very excited about these projects. But again, this is a long process ahead of us. The second pillar includes initiatives related to mobility and new technology. We are already designing and implementing the fuel station of the future. This will be based on multiple offerings to our customers, including convenience retailing, differentiated products that will be offered in the petrol stations, CNG and hydrogen filling, electrification and charging of cars. We were the first, I believe, to introduce a network of chargers in one of the major highways in Greece, and we're continuously investing in charging units in our petrol stations. The third pillar includes initiatives in power, gas, and renewables. Within a short period of time, we have developed significant portfolio of operating renewable projects, and we have an even larger portfolio currently under development. In relation to natural gas, we have developed our trading activities, and we are designing, and actually we are about to commence constructing a floating storage and regasification unit outside our Corinth refinery. This unit is unique in its location, and we expect to provide a significant support to the natural gas grid in Greece. Lastly, in this category, I think we are the first large industrial plant to install batteries in our facilities. We are installing behind-the-meter batteries in our refinery for our own use in the refinery, and we plan to increase this portfolio with a larger installation within the year. The fourth pillar is about renewable and alternative fuels. We are in the process of designing a unit for the production of biofuels within our refinery. At the same time, we are developing two projects for the storage, transportation, and dispatch of hydrogen. Lastly, we are very active in the circular economy. I want to remind you that through our subsidiary LPC, we currently operate one of the most advanced plant for lubricant recycling and regeneration in Europe. We are recently became very active in waste to energy projects where we see significant growth. Having discussed how we tackle energy transition within Moderator, I want to summarize and stress a few points. As we said, energy industry is going through a profound change, driven by these carbon reduction targets and consumer preferences. We expect that electric vehicles and biofuels will play a significant role in Greece in the future. This energy transition requires incentives and significant investments in low carbon technologies that will be driven mostly by big investors. The risks associated with this, as we discussed in the beginning, are significant. The immature technologies make them even more riskier, so a careful combination of big investments and incentives need to be put in place. We in the oil and gas industry will need to develop a long-term strategy to diversify our business. We are in a unique position due to our scale, infrastructure, and existing resources to do so. But we also need to make sure that our existing activities keep generating the cash we need to support this transition. The positive impact to Greek economy, as I said before, is immense. We strongly believe that. We need to stress the necessity of a swift implementation of a policy framework. This is important as it would facilitate the creation of a new economic activity, which will be based that already exist in our country. We are Moderator. We hope and plan to remain at the forefront of this effort and to continue to contribute to improving our country and the world that we will inherit to our children. And with that, I want to thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Papaconstantinou, for your presentation, especially regarding the challenges and the preparation that need to be done in the pathway towards 2050. We saw the refiner strategy and initiatives. So let's move to the other parts of the supply chain. Mr. Liapis, what are the challenges that the distribution companies face towards decarbonization? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Floudopoulos. Yes, we have a very big challenges on that, as we're on the final end of the whole petroleum supply chain and especially the downstream supply chain. What I'm going to speak about is the transformation of petroleum distribution companies towards 2050 and decarbonization. So what we see, and we followed after all the excellent speakers that went before, is that the energy product mix is really rapidly changing when we move toward the 2050 and as we so-called decarbonization. So we really believe that refined products are losing a significant market share in favor of alternatives and renewables. And also, especially the European policy, but also the policy all over the world about energy efficiency, it reduces total energy demand. Electrification is strongly promoted for private cars, and you know that private cars is a big share of our sales. And also in Greece especially, you have natural gas pipelines, and especially grids in general are expanding in favor of their products and creating a loss in our sales. We showed also from the previous presentations that in total, energy consumption, despite of development, is going to be reduced. And this is because we have all this energy efficiency scheme and energy efficiency engines, and they're promoted very much of this. But we see that liquid fuels, seeing this projection towards 2050, liquid fuels will play a very strong role as well in the total energy mix. So we'll still have, in a way, conventional gasoline or conventional diesel, maybe neutral, but from carbon dioxide point of view, from carbon point of view, but they will still be in use. And also have a lot of biofuels in that, a very big percentage in the mix, electricity, and we'll start to see also hydrogen and ammonia, of course, for fuel cell vehicles. It's not for the near future, but it sure seems to be the future. So we see that we have less fuels in general, but liquid fuels will still, in a way or another, play a significant role in the total energy mix, especially in the transport sector. Taking in mind now what happens exactly with oil distribution companies and the wholesalers that, as we say, are the final point, the final part of the fuel supply chain, just before the final consumer. So we see that the last years, fuel distribution margins are constantly declining. So have a very strong competition that has turned fuel wholesales and retail distribution to a very low return on capital employed segment. And market share of independent retailers has been growing since the end of the last century and the last 20 years, further deteriorating the historical margin of this segment. Especially in Greece, we see it, and it's for various reasons. It's not the forum now to explain why, but it sure happens in this way. We see a lot of liquefied petroleum gas to come in the market and takes a significant market share the last 20 years. And now we see also compressed natural gas also increasing their market share. At the moment, getting into the market and increasing their market share. And also we've seen, especially in Greece, a very high increase in taxation and all the financial crisis that we have, especially in Greece, that tend consumers to be in quest of low prices and be very high price sensitive, let's say. From the other hand, you know that petrol stations is our main output for our products. We have also industrial sales, but as the grids expand, industrial sales are losing their market share, and petrol stations are the main output for our sales. But also we see for there that opportunity cost of petrol stations is really changing. From one hand, we have increasing vehicle autonomy. This means that we have seen a very big reduction in consumption. So less, let's say, petrol stations are needed. And especially in Greece, together with the financial crisis, we saw that the number of petrol stations in Greece reduced in half the last 10 years. Prices are growing, and not only prices, mainly through taxes. And we expect in the future more, let's say, green taxes that will also raise the price as all this cost for renewables, we believe that will go to the final consumer, who is the one that pays at the end. And when we have higher prices, this means for wholesalers that we have a bigger financing cost. Real estate values in urban centers are rising, and this happens all over the world, and in Greece especially. We also have technology and legislation demands that are bigger as time goes by, and as new, especially European legislation comes inside, and this means bigger investments, of course, in the petrol stations. And I will see margins decline, and also have new costly obligations that arise year by year for the distributors. We finally had the last years all about this energy efficiency obligation scheme that we know that we expect for the next decade that will rise very much our costs. How did the market react until now? So the gas station network operators at the moment, the dependent ones and also the big network operators, they focused on increasing all the non-fuel products and services in their petrol stations. So they started cooperations with coffee and snack chains. So we see that, let's say, a big part of the revenue of a gasoline station comes out from the coffee shop. And also this is critical for investment from the side of the petrol company. They have mini market products, of course, car wash and all the other car, let's say, services. And they try to go to 24/7 operation in order not to lose any revenue. But despite of all this, this movement does not seem enough to make the profitability capable of sustain the business. So what we see the last years and what we must see is that the sector must turn to new business models. And what is the alternative for that? We see that happening in the market. Some companies, they proceeded more boldly, let's say, to changes and to new investments. Other more slowly, and other they did it successfully, other not. But what do? They started marketing premium or differentiated, that we say, products, and they invest a lot of that in technology, in new additives, in more advanced additives, and also in promoting these new products and trying to be a big share of their sales, as they usually have bigger profitability than the plain, let's say, products. Some of wholesalers, they take a strong position in other energy sources, such as biofuels or other alternative fuels, like, for example, photovoltaic parks. Of course, most of them invest in alternative fuels. Of course, liquefied petroleum gas is the first one of that. But we see that many companies in the petrol stations now, they build CNG stations. We believe that the liquefied natural gas will follow, and finally will go to hydrogen, as fuel cells will substitute all other energy forms in transportation. What they trying to do also, all the wholesalers, is to convert their gas stations into energy stations, which is a new model, a new concept that we'll explain right after. Others, they try to diversify in other energy sectors through grids. Most of the companies we see now that they market natural gas and electricity through grids, and the liberation of our markets that happened in Europe and especially in Greece the last 2 years helps in that destination. Other companies should expand their operations, creating vertical enterprises, some of them going into international trading as something that is, let's say, relative to their usual business. And most of them go down to own gas stations, something that before 20 years in Greece, it didn't happen and was a little bit forbidden in the past. Now they go to be vertical and own the gas stations so they can secure their market share and also their margins. Many companies, especially the big ones, they try to expand in other countries, some successful, some other not. Of course, most of them invest on electric vehicle chargers in points other than the gas stations. We'll see that in gas stations, it doesn't seem to be a very big opportunity or a very, they cannot gain a big profitability out of this because of the situation in the gas stations in Greece. And some of them even diversify into quite different sectors than oil distribution, which means construction, energy services, shipping, etc. And unfortunately, some of the traditional players that cannot stand and cannot successfully transform to the new energy scenery, they sell the network to bigger players as a movement of survival. Energy station, then we knew about gas station, petrol station, but now we go in general from fuel station to energy station model. And what does it mean? What is an energy station? Of course, it will still, and in the future, sell conventional fuels and, of course, lubricants. But also it will have liquefied petroleum gas, compressed natural gas. Later on, and some of them, the bigger one, have liquefied natural gas for vehicles, but they can also, these CLNG, let's say, small scale stations can serve as a supply points for industrial customers. Of course, they install superchargers for electric vehicles, and a supercharger is something significant because in the gas station, the electric vehicle cannot stay for long, so it must have a very, very big supercharger. And also, the energy station serves also as a sales spot for new natural gas and electric energy contract customers for sales through grids that the mother company performs. And what is following on that? Of course, hydrogen and ammonia. We don't know the technology yet. Hydrogen is something that I hear from when I was a very young engineer, and still doesn't see the implementation in vehicles, but we know that this is the future. So the energy stations will also supply vehicles with hydrogen or ammonia for powering their fuel cells. And this is a little bit what will be with the energy station. This means that we must have quite different gas stations from what we know, especially what we know in Greece, when we have very small and extended network. So it means we'll go to fewer gas stations, bigger one, maybe outside of the urban sites and the center of the cities, and have a quite new, a very big, let's say, project and very big investment. So towards future, all distribution companies have 3 pathways to implement the energy supply if they want to survive and stay in business. The first pathway for that is the trading of conventional fuels and conventional logistic fuels, which means fuels that are different from the one that we know now, the simple and old conventional petroleum fuels, but fuels that are liquid or they look alike and they use the same infrastructure. So diesel, gasoline, heavy fuel oil for the industry, liquid biofuels, and we have a lot of them, first and second generation biofuels in biodiesel, bioethanol, HVO, and others, biogas, of course, and of course, pyrolytic biofuels and pyrolytic fuels, and also methanol. What's the pros on that? That in general, these fuels, they don't need, or they need a very low investments on that. So the companies can go on and use their infrastructure, use their investments with a low cost. And also you must realize that engines and burners that are constructed today and that are manufactured today, they will last for more than 20 years. So in the next 20 years, at least, judging from today, we will have the need for these conventional, let's say, fuels. But there are some cons as well for this, for the various reasons, especially from the promotion of alternatives and electrification, we have a declining market share. And this means that the competition will be much higher, the profitability much lower. So this is a pathway that all of us will still keep for the future or for the near future, but it will lose profitability. The second and more advanced, let's say, pathway for the energy supply is the alternative fuels, but with a high cost of infrastructure. At first, compressed natural gas, and then liquefied natural gas, ammonia and hydrogen. Of course, these are the fuels of the future, let's say, and they will gain an increasing market share, and they have a big benefit. They have a potential to be produced from renewable sources. We know now, for example, hydrogen is not renewable, LNG is not renewable, it's alternative but not renewable, so it has a problem with the greenhouse gas emissions, but it can be produced from renewable sources in the near future, and thus it will survive decarbonization. All these fuels can be bridge fuels and use exactly the same infrastructure with the non-renewable ones with the new renewable ones, and so the investments will not be lost, and they will keep making profit. What are the cons? Exactly that they needed very high. We need very high investments for this new infrastructure, LNG is very expensive. A station is really high investment for building one. And of course, for ammonia or for hydrogen, we still are not even in a pilot phase for vehicles. So we need very high investments. And unfortunately, there is a slow market development in that. We must wait some years for that. So anybody that will invest on this kind of alternative fuels will have very high financing cost, as he cannot gain a benefit soon from these investments. And there is, of course, a third pathway for non-conventional fuels, which is electricity. As we know and as we expect, for the next 10, at least 15 years, we'll have a very big transformation to private cars, mainly from conventional fuels to electricity. So we can deal with that, of course, and we expect a much faster penetration in the market than other alternative or renewable fuels. But unfortunately for us, the gas station is not the ideal spot. Usually, the gas stations, when we say especially in the cities, they don't have a big parking space for many cars, for many vehicles. They need very big investments in order to put the superchargers, to install the superchargers, and also to enhance their power supply from the grid. And of course, for the next 2, 3, or 5 years, especially in the gas stations, the return of investment on these big investments will be very low. As we explained before also, the gas stations are not the ideal point, and so you must put superchargers there because there is no need for the car driver to stay for a long time in a gas station. You cannot keep him there for more than, I say, 10 minutes or something like this. So it's not the ideal, let's say, spot for this. And this means that it's not an easy investment for the oil distribution companies, this pathway. And we see that many questions arise out of all this. The first one, and a very critical one, is low profitability of oil distributors capable to fuel these high investments, because they really need a lot of money to transform themselves from fuel companies to energy companies. Will verticalization of big players, as we see it happen the last years very intensively, drive independent companies out of business? In Greece, we saw this happening. Low margins and verticalization of big players drove some very old and traditional companies out of business. Will electrification of private cars expand much faster than predicted, and so we lose much faster market share? And something that we see not for next year, but maybe we'll see it soon if the technology get advanced in this, especially in the battery section. Will electrification expand in other mobility categories, like, for example, heavy-duty vehicles or shipping? And it's something very possible if battery technology is going to get cheaper. And at last, but not least, maybe it's a very big barrier as well. Will oil wholesalers' mentality allow them to transform fast enough into energy providers? Wholesalers always were depending in their infrastructure in order to make business. They're old companies and very traditional companies usually. So they must change mentality in order to transform fast and survive in the new environment. And in all these questions, I think, and I believe that there is only one answer, that oil distributors, in order to survive, they must form a clear and realistic vision for the future. And thus, they must show high flexibility and high adaptation skills in order to survive quickly and continue to be profitable and healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liapis, for your presentation and for sharing with us the challenges of the distribution and the new business models that need to be adopted by the companies. We move on to our next speaker, Mr. Kontaroudis. Mr. Kontaroudis, the transformation of the industry creates new challenges regarding ESG issues as well as accessing capital markets. So the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you for the chance to participate in this conference. Being among industry experts is not only a pleasure, but also a necessity, as we, regulators, should have a good picture of industry's needs. Knowing these needs, we try to include them into relevant regulations so that the outcome is a balanced regulation framework that protects investors but also fosters growth. The subject of this conference is of high importance, as Europe, given the Green Deal initiative, has already set goals and many important steps have already commenced. Undoubtedly, significant funding will be required to transform the European economy to a green one. I will begin by trying to explain the role of the Greek Capital Market Commission and how we are assisting in this effort to raise funds. The Hellenic Capital Market Commission authorizes and supervises regulated markets in Greece, investment firms and market infrastructures, all in relation to financial instruments. The Hellenic Capital Market Commission supervises listed companies, that means companies with listed securities. In this respect, our role is mostly confined to regulated markets and hence we do not cover the full spectrum of financing possibilities a company can have. Bank lending in Europe is at 75% of total financing. This number in Greece is estimated to be even higher. But the Capital Markets Union target is to decrease this and significantly approach the US numbers. As an example, in 2019, issuances in Europe amounted to euros 140 billion, whereas in the US to $800 billion. I would like to describe briefly how a regulator is involved in financial services regulation. A specific regulatory process in financial services was first introduced in 2001, when the EU endorsed the proposals of the Lamfalussy report. Different levels of regulations were adopted. Following the financial crisis, the EU reformed its framework for financial supervision. It established a new European Systemic Risk Board for monitoring macroprudential risks and transformed previous level 3 committees into independent authorities with enhanced powers. These 3 European supervisory authorities, which were set up, are the European Banking Authority, the European Securities and Markets Authority, ESMA, the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority. Among the powers these authorities have are the responsibility of preparing the so-called technical standards, a particular category of level 2 measures that they draft and submit to the Commission. The Hellenic Capital Market Commission actively participates in the Board of Supervisors in ESMA, and very recently also in the Management Board of ESMA. This means that we do not only supervise, but contribute in the formation of delegated and implementing acts which supplement and amend basic acts. We also contribute to level 1 by providing consultation at a national level to relevant to our competencies regulation. So we, as a regulator, are involved in shaping regulation that clearly impacts the industry. This is the reason I previously mentioned that this interaction between the regulator and the industry is not only welcome, but indeed required. Let's see how things are shaping up in Europe regarding environmental matters. The European Green Deal provides an action plan to boost the efficient use of resources by moving to a clean, circular economy, restore biodiversity and cut pollution. The EU aims to be climate neutral by 2050. Reaching this target will require action by all sectors of European economy, including, of course, investing in environmentally friendly technologies, supporting industry to innovate, and decarbonizing the energy sector. The Sustainable Europe Investment Plan is the investment pillar of the European Green Deal, as in order to achieve a sustainable Europe, significant investment effort is required across all sectors of the economy. Reaching the 2030 climate and energy targets will require, is estimated, additional investments of euro 260 billion per year by 2030. Some aspects of this investment plan are, first, to mobilize at least 1 trillion euros of sustainable investments over the next decade through the EU budget. Second, it will create an enabling framework for private investors and the public sector. Financial institutions and private investors need to have the tools to properly identify sustainable investments. The EU taxonomy is considered key here. I will speak about it in the next slide. To achieve these environmental targets, this political commitment must be implemented through regulation commitment. Therefore, the first piece of regulation that came out was the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. This will be applicable from March 2021. This regulation affects the investment management industry, that is advisors, managers, or financial products manufacturers who will soon have increased disclosure requirements towards sustainable issues. The Commission has empowered the Joint Committee, that is the committee consisting of the 3 European supervisory authorities I mentioned before, to draft the necessary regulatory technical standards to specify the content, methodologies, and presentation of the required to be disclosed information. Environmental issues were originally planned to be in place before March 2021. Regretfully, these technical standards will not be delivered on time, and therefore the regulation will be applicable without the necessary details. In order to implement the Sustainable Finance Action Plan, the Commission mandated an expert group which called as a first action to establish a classification system at the Union level on which activities qualify as green or sustainable, starting with climate change mitigation. This is what we now call the taxonomy regulation. With this regulation, in order for an investment to qualify as environmentally sustainable, it has to contribute substantially to at least one of the following environmental objectives: climate change mitigation or adaptation, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, transition to circular economy, pollution prevention and control, protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. Additionally, this investment does not significantly harm any of the previous objectives and complies with technical screening criteria. The Commission shall adopt delegated acts for the technical screening of the environmental objectives I mentioned before. This will be applied in 2022 and some of them in 2023. The taxonomy regulation amends SFDR regarding the do no significant harm principle by instructing the Joint Committee to develop draft regulatory technical standards by the end of this year. The new prospectus regulation came into force in July 2019 and represents a major change in capital market regulation. It is considered one of the most significant accomplishments to date in the EU's Capital Markets Union, and it sets out rules to raise funds either through an equity capital increase or a bond issuance. The objective was to have easier access to capital markets, lower costs, while maintaining effective levels of investor protection. The equity and debt prospectuses are working well with the new prospectus regime. Risk factors are the most challenging aspect of the new regime. The prospectus regulation brought, amongst other aspects, a limit to the number of risk factors in the prospectus, as well as in the summary, along with the materiality assessment obligation by issuers. Another initiative to address the COVID-19 pandemic in Europe considers crucial to ensure for already listed issuers that the prospectus does not act as a barrier to raise capital on public markets. This European Commission has proposed at creating a temporary regime that will simplify the procedure for issuers to quickly raise capital during this pandemic. The regime creates a new type of a short-form prospectus, the EU Recovery Prospectus. The simplified disclosure is expected to reduce the cost of drawing up a prospectus and to make the document easier to understand. The EU Recovery Prospectus regulation is expected to be published by the end of March 2021, but it will only apply to an equity capital increase. The European Commission announced the establishment of an EU Green Bond Standard among the key new initiatives for 2021. The European Commission has set a target of 30% of Europe's 750 billion euros recovery plan to be raised through green bonds. Green bonds play an increasingly important role in financing assets needed for the low-carbon transition. However, there is currently no uniform green bond standard within the EU. Establishing such a standard was a recommendation in the final report of the Commission of High-Level Expert Group on Sustainable Finance. In the context of the renewed Sustainable Finance Strategy, the Commission launched a targeted consultation on the establishment of this standard. This ended in October 2020. On October 2020, also, the European Commission published the 2021 Commission Work Programme, where the legislative proposal regarding green bond standard is scheduled to be delivered in the second quarter of 2021. ESMA's response to the above consultation has been that the success of the EU green bond standard will, to a large extent, be determined by whether it is seen as a reliable indicator of investment in sustainable economic activities. In order to ensure reliability and alignment with the taxonomy, this standard will require external reviewers conducting rigorous assessments of an issuer's green bond framework. The best way of ensuring high-quality assessments is to introduce a formal EU registration and supervision regime of these external reviewers. This will ensure that the entities conducting such assessments have adequate resources, are using robust methodologies, and have measures in place to protect against conflicts of interest, ensuring that the market develops in a properly regulated and supervised way at EU level. And it supports the development of a social EU taxonomy as a prerequisite for reliable standards for social bonds. Before describing briefly the Greek market, I would like to mention that one green bond has been issued so far in the Greek market. During the last 12 months, more than 13 prospectuses have been approved by the Hellenic Capital Markets Commission, and more than 2 billion euros have been invested either in share capital increases or bond issuances. For this year, if you follow press reports, you may already know that demand is estimated to be much bigger as Greece's regulated market is increasingly appealing. Worldwide, near zero interest rates combined with countries' better ratings and subsequent drop of Greek government bond yields have resulted in corporate bond issuances at interest rates from 2 to 3.4% for 5 to 7 year maturities so far. The Capital Market Commission in the previous months has tried to further help this market by issuing the following decisions: to electronically submit relevant paperwork of prospectuses, to relax rules on distribution of funds raised. Companies and advisors are now responsible for describing relevant minimum percentages, if any, distributed to retail or institutional investors. The new procedure also relaxes restriction on participation of foreign private banking investors. And finally, besides Greek, of course, a prospectus can now be submitted and published in English only. Finally, I would like to finish with a few remarks on the new Greek corporate governance law. The newly published law in respect to corporate governance aims to modernize the internal structure of the listed companies and strengthening their board, thus meeting modern capital markets requirements. The new law reinforces the company's internal controls and builds shareholders' trust with an eye on making each company more attractive to investors by protecting shareholders' rights and by enhancing their safety through a sound corporate governance in line with European standards. The main new provisions of this law, which comes into effect in July 2021, are: the law requires each company to adopt a suitability policy covering aspects such as the selection, replacement, and appraisal of its board of director members in order for the board to include the most prominent and appropriate directors. The participation of independent, non-executive members in the board is now more detailed, and more robust criteria regarding the independence of those members are described. Furthermore, the law points out that either the president or the vice president must be a non-executive member. It lays down the obligation of each company to establish, besides the audit committee, 2 new independent committees, the remuneration committee and the nomination committee. The internal control system, consisting of internal control, compliance, and risk management, is also well described. Each company's obligation of having a corporate governance code compiled by an approved entity is now demanded, domestic or foreign, allowing each company to specify said code's provisions depending on its special characteristics. And last but not least, the new law includes provisions regarding a more wholesome gender representation in the board of directors by introducing mandatory quotas and by stipulating the company's obligation to set a diverse criteria for the selection of its directors. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kontaroudis, for your thorough presentation. So, we're turning to our last panelist, Mr. Peter Mather, who will present us BP's vision, strategy, and plans towards climate neutrality. Mr. Mather, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Harry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, of course.
I'm assuming you'd like me to be quite brief, so we have some time for discussion. First of all, just a big thank you to the organizers for inviting us and for laying on this conference. And I've been fascinated to hear my fellow panelists, so thank you to all of them. And I'll try not to repeat what things that have been said, because of course there's a lot of common ground between, particularly between those of us in the industry. 1 year ago tomorrow, BP set out a radically different strategy for the company, completely different really from the previous 110 years of BP's existence, where we'd been about how could we find and produce more hydrocarbons. And so it was a monumental moment in the company's history. And we accompanied that with a change of organization, quite a few changes in people, change in the chief executive at the top of the company. So it's been an extraordinary year, and I think the challenges that my fellow panelists talked about are very much ones that we share in BP. I suppose what I can bring is just a little bit more maybe on the sort of the upstream side of things, but effectively we announced 3 things a year ago. We had a different purpose, and this purpose was now about reimagining energy, so thinking differently. We'd been, as I say, in this particular model, this mental model about what we should be doing, and now is the time to reimagine energy. Within that, we declared a very specific ambition, to become a net zero company by 2050 or sooner, and the or sooner is quite significant. We're not saying we're going to wait around till 2049. We're starting now, and if we get there before 2050, that's fantastic. But we also want to help the world to get to that goal as well. So then on the right hand side, we outlined 10 aims around number 1, our net zero in our own operations. Number 2, net zero in the oil and gas that we produce. Aim 3 is halving the intensity of what we sell. Aim 4 is around methane reduction, particularly relevant for our upstream. And aim 5 is increasing our revenues on new energies, which I'll come back to. But also we felt, in this area of helping others get to the same place, that we should make sure that we advocate loudly for the right policies and don't sort of hide away. We incentivize our own employees with targets that reflect on their reward, targets around net zero. We align ourselves with industry associations like the one John Cooper represents, and we're delighted to be an active member of FuelsEurope and other industry associations. Transparency, and thank you to the last panelist for that presentation. Clearly signing up to initiatives within the ESG space, like what we call TCFD, Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures, making sure that people can see BP as it really is and what we're really doing. And then finally setting up actually a new business stream around cities and corporates, so helping others, helping cities get to where they need to get to as well. So in essence, the sort of strapline summary of all of this is that we are changing from our heritage, which is an international oil company, an IOC, and trying over the next few years, over the next few decades, to become a completely integrated energy company. So IOC to IEC. Now that sounds like a nice sort of play on words, but it is so completely fundamental now to the way that we're thinking. Not only the use of the word energy rather than oil and gas, but the use of this word integrated, because increasingly we reckon that the world's energy systems are going to become more and more integrated, energy provision more integrated, local energy systems, local energy projects becoming more integrated. So that's what we've launched ourselves on. Our strategy is really based around three broad areas. We will, on the right-hand side, as others have said today, remain in the oil and gas production business, but we will be reducing our activity quite substantially in that, down 40%, production down 40% by 2030. But as others have described, there is still a role for the right source of hydrocarbons going forward in a net zero world. So what we are focused on is what we call resilient hydrocarbons. And those are the ones, we're not chasing new greenfield projects in difficult parts of the world. This is about building on areas where there is already the infrastructure, there's the scope for decarbonisation, possibly the scope for carbon capture and storage in the proximity, and where the ability to produce does not impact on the on the planet or on biodiversity. So we will not be chasing after some of the projects that we probably would have chased after 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, to be perfectly frank. In the middle here, convenience and mobility. And thank you. I mean, it was great to have Nikolaos's perspective from a distributor point of view. We do believe that the customer will remain central to all of this, and the different solutions, mobility solutions that we've talked about today, from EVs through to e-fuels, they all have a role to play, and also the increasing demand for convenience offers that that customers will be asking for, and our convenience and mobility business is very important to BP. So that is a second strategic plank. And then finally, over on the left here, low carbon electricity and energy, and that, I suppose, is the new area. But I can tell you this: when we first established a smaller entity within BP around about the year 2000, we called it Alternative Energy, to try and look at developing our renewable energy business. It never really got going in the way we wanted it to. It was always a little bit off to the left. It was off to the side. It wasn't central to the DNA and the strategy of the company, and so it didn't really get hold of the strategy within the organization. And then, of course, we had financial crises, we had our own crises, and we've had and it's now that actually, instead of creating an entity that we've put over on one side, the low carbon agenda is actually completely central to everything that we do. And it's been extraordinary to watch from within inside. And then obviously, as I said, integrated energy systems going across, partnering is going to be incredibly important with countries, with cities, with regions, with other industries. And the digital innovation needs to drive this. That is probably the big enabler for a lot of this to happen. And so we're investing an awful lot in digital and in trying to drive innovation through, not necessarily within BP, but taking small shares in interesting, innovative organizations. So we've set some targets. Here are some numbers. We're all kind of, we all like numbers in our industry. So you can see we've split these targets here into 2025, 2030, and then 2050, or hopefully sooner, as I said. So in terms of those aims, so to take out 100% of the carbon from our own operations, running of our offshore facilities, the running of our offices and things, then we've set two interim targets, 20%, 30, 35% by 2030. Then in terms of the carbon footprint of our own production, what we actually produce, again, en route to 100% via a 2030 aim of 35 to 40%. Aim 3, which is always the most difficult one and probably has the most debate around the patch, is some people call it Scope 3, or Scope 3 is a version of this. This is obviously much more difficult. This is about the carbon footprint of the products that our customers then use for whatever. And that we've set an aim of 50% by 2050 or sooner, with 5 and 15% en route to that. Now that might be too low. We don't know. But given it's not something we completely control, we felt that was appropriate at this stage. But that is one obviously to revisit. And we're doing an awful lot on methane, because as you all know, methane emissions, methane is far more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. And you can have false economies by gasifying what was coal or something if you are emitting methane in the process. So methane reduction is incredibly important. And in terms of our investment in new energy, currently last year before last, let's say 2019 was about $500 million. That's going to increase tenfold to around about $5 billion by 2030. Could well be more. I mean, you've probably seen recently we've entered not only the North American offshore wind market, but actually as of Monday this week, the UK offshore wind market. Quite a lot of our investment is through joint ventures. So we have 50% share in Lightsource BP, which is the largest solar developer in Europe. So a lot of that doesn't actually show as our own capital, but it's very much activity that we're involved with. Now, these are the various scenarios that we're looking at in terms of energy use. Just very briefly, obviously, business as usual, which is if nothing were really to change between now and 2050, you'd see fossil fuels fall off a bit and quite a rapid increase in non-fossil fuels, which is the blue. But we wouldn't get to anywhere close to 1.5 degrees. So then we have this rapid scenario in the middle, which is broadly consistent with below 2 degrees, and that has a 300% threefold increase in non-fossil fuels and a 50% decrease in fossil fuels. But really where we're all heading is the one on the right, net zero, which is broadly consistent with the 1.5 degree target that we all buy into. And that shows a fourfold increase required by 2050 for non-fossil fuels, with a 75% reduction in hydrocarbons, fossil fuels. Now, obviously, the remaining 25% will need to be decarbonized in some way through carbon capture and storage. We're leading a very, very big project in the UK, which we hope will be one of the first carbon capture and storage projects at scale, certainly in Europe, but probably in the world. But also scope for offsetting and for other forms of carbon reduction. So my final slide, you'll be pleased to hear, is just, what are the beliefs that underline all of this for BP? Because this is such a radical departure, like it is for Hellenic, like it is for Motorola Hellas, like it is for you, Nikolaos. Such a radical departure. We've got to have beliefs, because there are good days and bad days. There are days when you really worry where the revenues are going to come from. You worry about declining previously high margin activities, declining those in order to enter new markets. So the beliefs that we have is, just going from the top left, renewable, the world will electrify, and colleagues have said that, with renewables a clear winner. Customers are at the heart of this. What will customers want to do? What sort of cars will they want to drive? What sort of convenience will they want? How will fleets want to manage themselves? Will they want to have a single refueling place back at base, or So there are a lot of things there. Or third belief is that oil and gas is challenged, but will remain part of the energy mix. Remember, I talked about robust hydrocarbons. It will remain part of the energy mix. And as John said up front, I mean, liquid fuels are incredibly efficient and easy to transport and store. Bottom left, energy systems will be increasingly multi-technology, integrated and local. This is the role of digital that I talked about. This is where cities are going to have, green hydrogen plants linked with carbon capture and storage, linked with wind or offshore wind if they're in a port area. And it's all going to become much more integrated because we will have the digital technology to do that. Customers, as I said, countries, cities, not just the convenience customer. You've got different types of customers emerging now. And other corporates, a number of companies that have come to us and said, look, we know the journey you're on, but can you help us with our journey as well? And we're not arrogant enough to think we have the answers yet, but we certainly know some of the questions. And finally, this will all be underpinned by innovation. This will all be underpinned by creativity. I'm sure a lot of the things we think are going to happen now won't happen, and there'll be things that we haven't even thought of yet that will all come in. So as larger companies, we just need to make sure we're constantly supporting that digital and that innovative drive that there is around energy. So look, in summary, this is the most exciting time of my career in BP and in the energy industry. It's a bit scary. It's a bit challenging. The share price of a lot of our companies hasn't yet responded in the way we like, but it will. It's a time for keeping calm, and it's a time very much for sticking to beliefs. And really pleased to have been able to share some of our thoughts, at least with you. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mather. At this point, as we conclude with presentations, I think we will move on to the Q&A session. And let me start with Mr. Cooper. I have a question from the audience. Mr. Cooper, given the NOx air pollution restrictions in the EU that will practically soon not allow for fossil diesel usage, especially for electricity generation engines, how can a renewable low-carbon diesel be a viable alternative for the continuations of their use?
So thank you. Look, thank you for the question. Air quality in cities remains a very important objective, and many European cities do need significant improvements. And so we recognize the importance of the vehicle emission limits for air quality pollutions as well. And Euro 7 is now under discussion, and we are part of that discussion with our scientific body, helping to advise increased targets, but that are also viable. We also see an exciting prospect with hybrid vehicles coming to availability now, and that is that with more and more vehicles having some electric range, it enables a prioritization of that use of electric range in the most sensitive parts of cities. There is already this technology, it's called geofencing, and it's already available on some BMWs and other cars today, where the vehicle prioritizes its electricity. When it goes into a city center, it goes into electric drive only. So it's a good example, actually, of how technologies can work together. A plug-in hybrid could have the liquid use in other areas where it's less sensitive on air quality and remain as an electric vehicle in city centers. We think this is a good solution. It's certainly true we have to have solutions to air quality in cities. So Euro 7 plus geofencing, we think, is part of that answer.
Thank you. Let's move on with Mr. Alexopoulos. Mr. Alexopoulos, what are the necessary conditions for the success of your numerous initiatives in the low-carbon liquid fuel space?
Thank you for the question, Harry. Look, our initiatives in low-carbon liquid fuels will entail major long-term capital investments. We technical, operational, and financial abilities to undertake such investments. Moreover, As we discussed already, energy transition will require a multitude of technological solutions in order to achieve climate change mitigation in the best possible way. And what is the best possible way? The goal is given. We have to achieve it at the lowest possible cost for society. Therefore, we believe that we should avoid mandates. We believe we should be technologically neutral, and low carbon liquid fuels should be an important part of the solution, and they should be included in the incentive schemes that are offered in other technological solutions, perhaps in different ways, but possibly with the same end result. Moreover, of course, you have the usual requirements for long-term capital investments, regulatory stability, legislative stability, tax stability. All those things are also very important.
Thank you, Mr. Alexopoulos. Another question from the audience for Mr. Mather. There are some articles that are claiming that, among other strategies, the net zero emission target will be met by selling or even shut down assets and BP refineries around the world. Given this statement, actually, what is the estimated capex the next 5 years to grassroots units and which capacity? And what are the plans for upstream activities while continue to drill or selling or abandoning oil rigs?
Gosh, okay, there's a lot in that question, and I'm happy to sort of take the detail maybe outside the meeting. I mean, we're not going to get to net zero by just shrinking. That's not the BP plan. We're going to get to net zero by a combination of things, focusing down on our very best oil and gas assets, our very best refineries, our very best production areas, but we will be producing 40% less oil and gas by 2030. So it's very much about focusing on our best assets. It's about making those assets the safest, the most efficient they can be. But at the same time, having this parallel surge in investment, to a certain extent financed by oil and gas, into the renewable space. And that's where, we plan to increase our investment in renewables by about 20-fold by the end of this decade. And that new investment will be a combination of things like carbon capture and storage, offshore wind, solar, hydrogen, some of the initiatives that John talked about around, liquid fuels in the future and things like that. So we certainly want to continue to focus on the right oil and gas assets, slightly reduce our production sort of over time, and divert those the efficiencies and the revenues from that area, from the oil and gas area, to investment in new energies, in low carbon technologies. So that's really the financial plan that we have over the next few years.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Mr. Papaconstantinou. Mr. Papaconstantinou, I was wondering, how do the shareholders of the company view the initiatives of Motor Oil's transformation? Are they skeptical or open towards these changes?
When you're asking about shareholders, I guess you mean the whole of our shareholder bases. Motor Oil, in Motor Oil, we are very careful in planning and executing. Most of the things you heard today from me have not been discussed openly before. We have a tendency of announcing after we've done. The shareholders of Motor Oil, generally speaking, I believe, see the need to adjust. We need to provide to them the certainty that there is growth, there is stability, and that our company will continue to lead in our markets. And as such, we're doing so. We are in a very favorable position to be able to fund all of what I discussed today. Our balance sheet and our financial capabilities allows us to invest, to test, to grow, and actually complete projects. We always keep an eye to our investors. We need to ensure that the returns remain healthy. We need, therefore, to continue to support our existing business because this is what produces the cash necessary to fund this plan. And as I said before, I don't mind saying that the investments needed to navigate the energy transition are quite large and require. It's a big company game. There are a handful of companies that can do so, and we need to assume the responsibility and remain at the forefront of this effort.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Cooper and Mr. Kontaroudis. What is the provision for neighboring countries that are not part of EU Fuels Europe, etc.? Is there any thoughts concerning fuels quality, tax balances, and tariffs concerning imported fuels?
Thank you, Harry. Good question. An important one, and it's one where we believe Europe's got to think clearly about its role in the world. We support Europe's ambition to drive towards climate neutrality, but we also believe we have to accept we'll be surrounded by countries that do not go as fast. And so it's really important to consider how industry can remain competitive at the same time as participating in markets where our level of regulation is much higher than other countries. So we think that maybe the best way to do this is to be very careful the way we construct markets for low carbon products. This is something that applies to our industry, but it also applies to cement industry. We heard from Mr. Koppenhol earlier, steel, fertilizer, other industries. They will all have the same challenge. At the moment, we have emissions regulation at the manufacturing site, which is ETS. It's the carbon trading system of Europe. It has a problem that it applies to the local manufacturer, but not to the manufacturer of those products that are imported. So there's an inherent imbalance there. We think that it's better to have the regulation at the point of the product entering the market. In our case, that's the same point where the product in road transport is taxed. And that applies to, we all know that fuel tax applies to fuel produced in Europe and also to fuel produced outside and imported. We have to think where the regulation applies. If we go down this route, actually what we're doing is creating a market that could be attractive for other industries outside of Europe to also supply. That's only fair, and what we would need to do to meet WTO terms for that. But of course, we also want to support our own industry. So I think we've got to think creatively about how we also support the investments necessary to make this green transition. So I think it was a great idea to include Mr. Kontaroudis into this conversation and the Hellenic Capital Markets Commission, because making things work for the investor is one of the two big parts of this. Make it work for the investor and make it work for the final customer. Then you'll get supply right and you'll get demand right. Actually create these markets for low carbon products and low carbon industries.
Thanks. Mr. Kontaroudis?
Hello. Okay, this is not my expertise, so I will thank for all the comments made, and I have nothing more to add to that. I'm covered by this answer.
Let me ask you then another question. Is corporate governance legislation harmonized across Europe? Can this be an obstacle for companies?
Well, if you mean that, no, this is not a regulation, a European regulation. So it's not harmonized. However, we strongly believe that a modern corporate governance law gives confidence to investors, especially to institutional investors, that the framework is effective. So despite higher costs to adapt to this new legislation that listed companies may face, we believe that companies will be more investable. Actually, the whole market will be more investable. And additionally, these companies that will embrace these governance rules, may I remind you that maybe not even listed companies anyone can embrace these rules. I believe these companies will enjoy more efficient procedures, which will effectively reflect positively on the bottom line and maybe even at a sustainable manner.
Okay, thank you. One last question. We have a lot of questions from the audience, but one last question for Mr. Liapis. Does the challenge of transformation pose a danger for the viability of the distribution sector in light of the fact that the market has been in crisis for over a decade?
Yes, sure it does. Sure it does. And we've seen it also, unfortunately, operating in some companies. I mean, when you have a shrinking market, especially that's one in Greece, when you have in the past, before the crisis, you have around 88,000 gasoline stations and now have less than 4,000. So 50% reduction in the market of gasoline stations. And with all this energy efficiency scheme, very big reduction in consumption. So the companies, they need money, they have a lot of restrictions, they have a lot of obligations that come, that they arise from the last European directives. And you know, the oil distribution company is exactly, let's say, the operator that has all the obligations from the taxes, the tax collection, I mean, the energy efficiency, the sustainability, and et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of burdens on ourselves, a lot of expenses, very big investments to perform in the future, and an unstable, let's say, environment for this one. And the expansion of the big players is also crashing, independent companies. So there is a big risk, and in order to overcome this risk, the oil distributors, they must think very clever, very smart, and very fast to describe their future, to know their future, and to proceed in that. Because otherwise, and we've seen it happen in Greece the last 2 or 3 years, you have big companies that failed to proceed, that they were sold or things like that. So they had big problems or bankrupt and things like that. So yes, it's a big danger for the oil companies in a shrinking market, but always danger is an opportunity. Companies that have an instinct of survival, they will survive and they will thrive as well.
Okay, I see that we have also time for another question. It's a question for Mr. Mather. How does a vast corporation like BP involve actively staff in the implementation of such a significant switch on core strategy, adjusting existing people or switching to different kind of staff skill set?
It's a fantastic question. I mean, there are two parts to it for me. One is, how do we take our staff with us as we change so much? And it's tough, because we're also slimming down the organization. We've been going through a 25% reduction in our staff numbers, at the same time as embarking on a very different strategy and doing it all over Zoom and doing it all over Microsoft Teams. It's not an ideal way of doing it, but we've invested a lot of time, I hope, in kind of talking to staff, engaging them. The new CEO spends a lot of his time in doing sessions with different groups of people. We had one for basically the whole company the last couple of days called BP and Me. And he encourages very open questions, sometimes quite uncomfortable questions. So there's one piece which is about just making people feel good and taking them with you. And of course, if you've been working for 25, 30 years in the upstream industry and you're, as an explorer, and you're now seeing BP saying, well, we're not going to do much of that anymore. I mean, that is destabilizing. So then the second part of the question, I think, is how do you reskill? Because we have some amazing people, as our colleagues do on this panel, in our organization. And, we're looking at that. So if you've been an explorer, can you then become an expert in carbon capture and storage? Because you understand the subsurface. You understand how to manage a reservoir. So can you convert that skill set to carbon capture and storage? Obviously, some of the other skill sets around, logistics, project management. We've managed some of the largest projects in the world, including the Southern Gas Corridor, which passes through Greece, as you know, en route to Italy. So project management skills. So there are generic skills, there are specific skills. But I do come back to the final point I would make. Remember that, as I said, we will still be in the oil and gas business in 2030 and beyond, just in a different way. But I think it is a really, really exciting time for younger people to come into the energy industry. But I think coming in now, you're not quite sure what you're going to be going out doing. You might be doing something completely different. So that's exciting. Engineering, capability, problem solving, people who really want to take on the challenge of the energy transition.
Thank you. Another question, it's open for anyone who can make any comments on alternative shipping fuels. Who would like to answer that? Yes, Mr. Cooper.
So yes, I mean, we've also done work on that. And of course, the transition from higher sulfur fuels to low sulfur fuels is still, and we've already seen some change with some increase in the use of LNG in marine fuels. There's a lot of thought going on in a number of different areas, and strategies are different in different companies, different shipping companies, different propulsion shipping power and propulsion system companies as well. Hydrogen is part of the strategies for some companies, and there are some prototypes we see in Europe in ferry crossing vessels, etc. There's also in short distance vessels some electrification being used. A fuel that's getting particular focus for real scale now is the use of ammonia, being more practical than the use of hydrogen, but still having the benefit of zero greenhouse gas emissions. And that's getting a lot of focus. In our view, there will be a mix of fuels in the future in shipping, and there will be some role for liquid fuels, because liquid fuels are essentially interchangeable from a physical point of view. They can use the existing infrastructure, and particular for vessels that have a very flexible schedule, they may take renewable liquid fuels in some location and existing petroleum distillate type fuels in others. So we see a mix. The challenge for maritime is, of course, accepting a higher cost fuel, because much of maritime has benefited for many decades of having really the cheapest fuel. The residual fuel is for many years been lower than the cost of crude oil. And the future alternatives to have lower greenhouse gas emissions are likely to be quite a bit more expensive than that. And we are talking about transitioning a global industry with there has to be global competition and global operations, and we have to work out ways to make all of that work. It's maybe one of the hardest to work from a policy perspective.
Thank you very much. And at this point, I think that we conclude our discussion, which I hope was helpful so as to enlighten the challenges that petroleum industry faces towards the 2050 green goals of decarbonization. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.